All right. Hello and welcome back to the Right Brain podcast. My dad is down in Nashville again.
Once again.
I brought him to a fancy dinner with my friends last night and they liked him way better than me. So
That's never true.
That hurt a little bit.
That's never true.
I also have been getting a lot of comments from you guys online that everyone's a big fan of my dad in white jeans. And I'm also jealous of the attention that he's getting for that. So I'm wearing white jeans today too.
You didn't even tell me that about the white jeans.
I wasn't going to tell you. We're in competition now.
Because your mother, always busts my chops about wearing white jeans. So she.
Yeah, my dad brings all the outfits that my mom never lets him wear. He brings it down here and he wears them on the show here. And then he gets in trouble afterwards. But you can't change what's already happened.
Too late. But people like them. So
people like them. So there you go.
Who knew?
You guys can keep voting on Dr. Rob's outfits.
I didn't even know. I wore these today and I didn't even know that information.
No, I know. When I walked in, I was like, bring it on.
Well, listen, we can only film so many shows in the summer. And so the only way your mother will even let me wear jeans, if it's white jeans in the summer, of course. Right?
Obviously, you're not going to wear them on the ski slopes.
No.
Okay, so today we're talking about neurotransmitters, which out of all of the words that my dad says, for some reason, I had to ask him 13 times what the word was. But we're talking about neurotransmitters and kind of chemical imbalances, if that's a real thing, right? Because a lot of people talk about that, especially people who take medication. They think that they're balancing out some chemical thing that's going wrong.
Exactly. And that's, the old thinking was people would always talk in terms of chemical imbalances. And so therefore the natural progression was, all right, well, we take medication, right? Medication is going to affect that, or that's what the medication is designed to do, is to correct these chemical imbalances. And that's, almost the extent of what most people think. A lot of people still think in those terms. And that's not really a real thing. I mean, there really is no such thing as chemical imbalances in the brain. And that was something that I think was put out there because we know there are these chemicals in the brain that are called neurotransmitters. And there are other things. Hormones can act as neurotransmitters. Immune chemicals can act as neurotransmitters. Inflammation. So there's a lot of things that can alter the way brain networks fire and communicate. And another thing I think is because when you look at the brain of people that have mental health issues, like if you look at x-rays or brain imaging or MRIs or CAT scans or, even things like EEG, for the most part, there is no injury. There's no obvious pathology. So you can get these people that have some serious mental health issues or developmental issues, completely psychotic. And if you look at their brain, it looks perfectly normal. So people would say, well, what is actually happening? We can't really see anything. So we know that if we give them a chemical, it may alter their behavior. So therefore, there must be some sort of chemical imbalance, even though there's actually almost no way of measuring that in the brain. So, that I think that concept is why a lot of people think, well, the only option is medication. And the problem is a chemical imbalance, and that, these chemical imbalances are genetic. They don't understand the epigenetics, which we talked about.
Oh, yeah. People were getting in fights under that post that I made about the genetics. I was like, go off, guys.
Yeah. And it's really crazy what some of the statements that people make. And it's really funny because, again, do people have these concepts? Like, why are people getting so emotional about whether something is genetic or not? And a lot of it is because, when somebody has an issue and they're told it's genetic, like, a genetic chemical imbalance, and that becomes what they identify with.
Yeah.
I have a chemical imbalance and it's genetic and there's nothing I can do about it and it's not my fault. And so they don't want to hear anything that's going to go against that, right?
No.
Because now that's their excuse, kind of. And so they have an excuse for their behavior. And it also means that they don't really feel like they're told you can't do anything about it. So now they don't have to do anything, right? Because I can't change it anyway. which again is not true in even in genetic disorders. So it's the same thing with this, with chemical imbalances. People identify with it, and I get it. As we talked about last time, people want an answer. You have these issues, these learning issues or disabilities or mental health issues in yourself or in your child. You want an answer. And a lot of, in psychology and psychiatry and a lot of their job, what they feel like is just to give you a diagnosis. Once they give you a diagnosis, their job is done. And then they basically say, well, there's nothing you can do about the diagnosis, but I gave you a diagnosis. I mean, I remember I went to a conference years ago, and these two really well-known psychologists, they got into this fight on stage over, the difference between ADHD, type 1 and type 2. And they were just talking about the criteria about what constitutes that diagnosis. And, I remember afterwards, I went up to them and I asked them, what's actually happening in the brain in ADHD and what neurologically is the difference between type 1 and type 2? And they looked at me and they were like, what? I don't know. I'm like, you're arguing up there over the difference in nuances of how you diagnose it, because in their once I diagnose it accurately, that's it. What are you going to do about it? Nothing. But it's like it's so crazy, right? Yeah. But that's the way people get a diagnosis, and now they carry that diagnosis like a badge of honor, and now they're okay. This is who I am.
It's kind of crazy that it's like the diagnosis is the most important part, where the most important part should be like, okay, how do you fix it?
The most important part should be what is happening in the brain that gives you those symptoms. Like, why do they have these symptoms? Like, why? What is the actual issue? Why do they have, depression, or why are they sad, or why are they euphoric, or why are they manic, or why are they, losing touch with reality, or why do they have tics, or why do they have digestive issues or immune issues? Why? What is actually happening in the brain and the body that's causing it? And even to this day, nobody really thinks like that. It's what's frustrating to me, but I can't help but think that way. And to me, it's all that really matters, right?
Well, I guess when people talk about it in terms of chemical imbalances too, I think it makes it easier for them to be like, well, if it's a chemical imbalance in my brain, then taking chemicals is
Makes
going
sense.
to balance it out.
Right.
And so because I feel like that's a lot of my friends. And it happens a lot in the music world and in the creative world, where there's so many people in my fields that are bipolar or just have horrible depression and just all these things that are crippling for them every day. And then it's they finally get on the right medication. And I've heard them be like, my life is so changed. And I've had friends that are like, why don't you just get on a medication? And I think about it sometimes. When I was 19 and I went to that, the eating disorder center, they gave me an antidepressant, and I felt like I didn't have super high highs and super low lows. I was just in the middle, but it was just a weird feeling. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, it would be great if I didn't have these ups and downs every day, but I don't know. But also I was just watching the Sex and the City reboot. This new season is whatever it's called, and Just Like That. And one of the episodes, the ex-wife calls Carrie and she's like, I have a favor. Can you get me some Adderall for my son? Their son that's 15 or whatever. And he has all these behavioral problems. And so whatever, the dad doesn't want him on Adderall because he thinks he already has a substance abuse problem. And he's like, why would we give him more drugs? And then the mom's like, look how he's behaving without them. We should put him on it. And then it was so easy for them to get the drugs because apparently everybody's kids is on Adderall. And it was just the way it was portrayed on the screen really kind of rubbed me the wrong way and upset me a little bit. But I could see, I'm not a parent of one teenager, let alone multiple. So I could see how it'd be overwhelming to just try and be like, okay, yeah, I guess I'll put my kid on this, but it's just so bad I don't know.
Yeah. And the messaging, really starts with mostly the medical professionals, right? And because they only know medication. you go to a medical doctor. What do you expect? I mean, there are some medical doctors that are very good in what we call functional medicine and nutrition or functional immunology, but very few of them really have any sort of understanding or working knowledge of the brain and how it works. But for the most part, the run-of-the-mill doctor, you're going to go there and they are going to prescribe medication. And of course, that's what you're going to get. And that's all they know. And they're going to tell you that's all there is because that's all they know. And so most parents are just given this idea, well, your child is struggling or an adult with depression. And your only answer is, antidepressants and we can try all these different, and it absolutely has an effect on the brain. It may actually make you better. It may make you worse. But the point is, you're taking these chemicals and these chemicals are absolutely affecting your behavior. But it's a symptomatic effect. And again, most people don't really understand what medications do. So when we talk about neurotransmitters, there's really kind of 4 major neurotransmitters in the brain. There's other ones. There's 2. One is the biggest excitatory one is called glutamate. The inhibitory one is called GABA. But then there's, ones that people hear a lot about, dopamine, serotonin, and then there's lesser known ones, acetylcholine and norepinephrine. And most of the drugs out there are to try to manipulate them in some way or another. But what most people don't realize is that the neurotransmitters are lateralized to right brain or left brain, so that the right brain is more sensitive to serotonin and norepinephrine, and the left brain is more sensitive to dopamine and acetylcholine. So, we have different drugs that are designed to target this. But, when you look at, I remember years ago, read work by a guy named Robert Sapolsky. He's a pretty big researcher at Stanford, still very active. And, years ago, he had this course and he would talk about how, neurotransmitters are things that are produced and we need them to live, right? Without neurotransmitters in your brain and in your body, you couldn't function. Your nervous system couldn't function and you would die. Dopamine is found in sponges, like the animal, the sponge, right?
Oh.
Right. So at the lowest life form, they have neurotransmitters.
Like a
sponge. Did you know a sponge is an animal?
Dad, you set me up for that. That was not fair.
But
what do you mean? Like SpongeBob? No, I'm just
kidding. SpongeBob. Yeah, SpongeBob has dopamine in it.
I wouldn't be surprised by that.
Yeah. So, when you talk about looking at different disorders, then, that is part of it because, some disorders, there may be like a hyperdopaminergic state. Others, there may be like a hyperserotonic state. But really what you're talking about is there are networks in the brain, there are areas of the brain that produce those neurotransmitters, and the pathways affect behavior. And there's a message. So the message is in the network, right? So you're sending a message, and then these chemicals get sent out to send the message. And if the message isn't there, the chemicals aren't sent. So if you have a deficit of the chemicals, it's not a problem that the chemicals, they're one of the most easiest and basic things to make in our body. They're made from what we call amino acids, which are the building blocks. Some of them are literally amino acids. And a lot of them, though, we do need, we have what's called essential amino acids. We need to get them from our food. We need to eat certain foods to be able to get certain amino acids that are going to be there to be able to make our neurotransmitters. But the idea that we can run out of them or have a deficiency of them is probably not a real thing, because if you did, we would die. But they're really easy and cheap chemicals to make. And if you're not eating the right proteins, then your body will tear down your own proteins to make them. So the idea that you're going to run out of a neurotransmitter like dopamine or serotonin or something, or that you have a deficiency, is probably not a real thing to begin with.
Wait, really?
Yes.
Oh my God, I feel like that's something that actually kind of makes me feel a little bit better, because I feel like because I took Adderall for a little while, and then I remember I was like feeling so different afterwards. I mean, I feel like I'm like back to normal, but it's been like years now since.
Well, let's talk about what that does. So Adderall itself,
because remember Roman said that like Adderall, since he stopped taking it, he's felt like maybe he lost something.
yeah. So if you look at what do medications do, then right,
Yeah.
most people think, something like Prozac elevates your level, or you make more serotonin, or makes your body make more serotonin, or Ritalin, or some of the other stimulants. They make more dopamine, right?
Okay.
In some way.
Yeah.
I mean, is that what most people think?
Yeah, that's what most people think, for
right.
sure.
That's not what happens.
Oh, that's so funny. I didn't know that.
Medication does not. No medication out there actually elevates your level. That makes more neurotransmitters. So that's important to know. Besides the fact.
Then why does everyone think that?
Because they're what we call, so like they're different. They have different effects, but what they do, what medication does, is typically affect one of two things. They either affect the receptor sensitivity. So they may make your receptors for dopamine or serotonin or norepinephrine more sensitive. So they may make your receptors respond more.
Okay.
Or they do what's called like serotonin reuptake inhibitor or dopamine uptake inhibitor, which means that when a message is passed, we send a message, the neurons fire, and it goes along a pathway, and then certain chemicals are released to either do one of two things: either activate or excite the other neuron, or to inhibit it. So either to block a message from going through or to dampen it. And so when that message goes through, it's released, it lands on receptors, and it activates or changes something in the other neuron. And then chemicals are released, enzymes are released by the same neuron to break down those neurotransmitters and then reabsorb them and make them again. Okay, so that's another reason why we don't run out of them. So what certain drugs do, like Prozac and Ritalin, they delay or they prevent that enzyme from being reduced, and they don't break down the neurotransmitter, and so the neurotransmitter stays on the receptor longer.
Okay, but what about if people take like recreational drugs like Molly or like acid or something, and people are like, we'll talk about someone and they'll be like, wow, that person's fried, like they've like taken so much of this or so much of that. And like, so I remember there were people in college where like my friends were like, that person's fried, like, and that's how they would say it. And then in my head, the way I pictured it was that like they just like depleted whatever they had. I don't know.
It definitely alters brain to a certain extent, but what it does typically is that it makes your brain either, less responsive to your own chemicals. So if you're taking a drug and it's, let's say, keeping serotonin around longer than it should,
okay,
or it's altering your receptors, then one of the things that can change in the brain is the amount of receptors. So the amount of receptors you have is somewhat, responsible for the level of activity. If you have a pathway that has a lot of activity, then, the brain wants to maintain a certain level of activity or a certain balance. And if there's too much activity or if the brain's too responsive, it'll get rid of some of the receptors or make them less sensitive.
Could you fix that?
Yeah, that can be changed.
That can be changed.
That absolutely can be changed. But what happens in a lot of cases is that when people are on drugs for a long period of time, they alter their amount of receptors,
yeah,
and the sensitivity of their receptors. And you need to be taking more and more and more drugs to be able to get the same level of effect. And then at a certain point, your brain is down-regulating your own receptors and your own responsive enough that you may not be able to. And then every drug has a side effect. Every drug has a negative impact. Mm-hmm. And because it's not specific, it's global, right? The drug's going everywhere in your brain. And even though, they may be specific issues. So that's the thing. When I look at a problem, I look at it, what area of the brain is causing this either to be too much or too little.
Okay.
And then we want to target that with lowering that area and elevating the other area in some way by stimulating it, by activating it, and by using the own natural pathways to be able to do it, right? It's the difference between, let's say, someone's going to, get muscular by taking a steroid, which isn't natural. I mean, it's causing effects in the body and it's kind of mimicking some natural effects, but it's not really, normal, versus going out and exercising your own and really doing it and really creating changes that way. One is a much more healthier way to do it. So it's the same thing. You can activate the brain by getting the brain to use it or by providing a certain particular stimulus to change the brain, which is going to change the chemical firing, which may change the receptor sensitivity in a more natural, appropriate way. Or you can try to do it artificially through drugs. And what you're doing is you're, altering your receptor sensitivity. You're altering certain receptors, like we talked about beta blockers and what they do, right? And how they block.
I still got to test those out. I'm just kidding.
Just kidding. So, that's the thing. There's a lot of misconceptions. First of all, there's almost no way to actually measure chemicals imbalance in the brain. And a lot of people also go through different tests that are urine tests. And we have like a lot of dopamine and serotonin in our body. I mean, like the majority of serotonin is in your gut and is used in your gut.
Is that why I only feel happy if my stomach isn't hurting me? And my stomach hurts me every day, so I don't feel happy a lot.
Well, it may have an effect on that, obviously, but the effect of the neurotransmitter in your gut is different than the effect that it's having on your brain. And the fact is that the neurotransmitters in your body don't cross the blood-brain barrier. So there's no direct relationship that can be measured, meaning a lot of people will go through urine tests and the urine tests will come out and say, oh, you have low dopamine or you have high serotonin. And that's why you're feeling certain things in your brain. And the fact is, some really good people have really discredited that and said, you can't do that. You can't interpret and assume that because there's a higher low amounts in the urine, that there's higher lower amounts in the brain.
Oh, it's separate. So whatever.
It's separate, right.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
Why would there be dopamine in your stomach?
Well, because again, you have nerves in your stomach. You have, neurological mechanisms happening, and they're neurotransmitters. And again, they're just messengers. It's really the pathways and the networks in the brain that create emotions, that create ideas or memories or feelings, and that, are also regulating a lot of your body functions. That's why a lot of people, refer to the gut as the second brain.
Yeah.
It's really not. I think that is kind of dumb when people say that, but
cool.
We'll probably get
I'm pretty sure I've said that many times. So.
We'll probably get a lot of people yelling at me on this clip. Here's another thing, big thing. People hear all the time, all these brain issues, that it starts in the gut. It starts in the gut. It does not start in the gut. Anybody who says that doesn't know anything about the brain. Now, doesn't mean the gut isn't important. It doesn't mean that there, aren't problems with leaky gut or food sensitivities or inflammation. We talked about all of that, right?
Yeah.
But that's not where it starts. The majority of the time it starts in the brainstem, it starts in the brain, and it doesn't start in the gut. And the gut is not the second brain. It doesn't do anything. I mean, when you look at the connectivity in the brain and the sophistication and the physics of the way the brain works, to compare the gut to it is ridiculous. Just because the gut can operate independently and it has a lot of nerves and it has neurotransmitters, and it reacts to different chemicals, it's not the second brain.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've told a lot of people that it is. So if I told you that because I'm a doctor by association, because my dad's a doctor, sorry, I was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I understand the gut is an important organ and there's a lot to it and it's complex, but the brain, and that's the whole thing, understanding about, neurotransmitters, what it means. And that's why I created vitamins. And the vitamins are the only vitamins right now that are out there that actually, take into account that there are different neurotransmitters for the right brain and the left brain. Here's another thing that's pretty interesting, because we talked about what is depression. And to me, neurologically, depression is when emotions on the right brain are too high. So the areas of the brain are overactive, especially in the frontal lobe areas. And in the, you feel too much sadness, which is a right brain emotion, and shame and guilt, along with the left brain being decreased, and the network that creates joy or happiness is low, and pride is low. So you have this low self-esteem, depression, and shame from the right side, combined with that decrease of, happiness. So that is what's happening. The right brain is generating mostly serotonin and norepinephrine and what we call GABA. The left brain is mostly going to be dopamine, acetylcholine, and glutamate. Okay, so those are the primary ones. So now we give somebody Prozac. What does Prozac do? Supposedly, it supposedly raises the level of serotonin. As we said, what it really does is it prevents the breakdown of serotonin in the synaptic cleft. But if their right brain is already too high, and serotonin is a right brain neurotransmitter, wouldn't that make it worse?
Yes.
You would think it would, right?
Yeah.
So then how is that actually working? I think it's working in a different way than what we think. I think what happens is, as we were talking, as you now raise the amount of serotonin around, I think what your body naturally does is lowers the amount of receptors for serotonin. So it lowers your responsiveness to serotonin. And so you're not feeling as sad. And it lowers a little bit of that activity of the right brain, which is automatically going to bring up a little bit of the left brain. And dopamine is more the happy emotion, right? So serotonin is more the sad chemical. Dopamine is more the happy chemical.
Oh,
and
okay.
Dopamine is left, serotonin is right. So I think that the drugs might even work different than we think, meaning that, yes, they may be elevating and keeping serotonin around, but it's not elevating the amount of serotonin. And obviously, and actually, the effect might be to actually lower the level of serotonin, which is lowering the right brain and elevating the left brain, because serotonin and dopamine also work kind of somewhat against each other.
Oh, this is so confusing. Like, not like in a good way, but this is not, you're saying all the things that I thought of things so differently before this. So
yeah, well, that's why, when even with researchers, I listen to podcasts, I listen to researchers, and they'll talk about something. And they'll talk about, this chemical or this peptide or this is going to be the answer. I mean, I was just listening to an Andrew Huberman thing where they were talking with a researcher on autism and talking about oxytocin, which is another neurotransmitter that is like a bonding, it's like the love hormone, right? And they were like, well, people in autism and, when we study rats that look like they have autism, they have less oxytocin. So let's just give them more oxytocin, and that's the social chemical and the bonding chemical. But it doesn't work that way. It may have a temporary effect, but the answer is, well, why would they have less oxytocin? Where does oxytocin come from? So just the whole idea of thinking about, medications, and that's why we know medications can definitely affect the brain, and they have an effect on neurotransmitter production. But it's just temporary. It's like taking an aspirin. There's a temporary effect. It's not actually having any sort of real functional change. And we know that medications don't create neuroplasticity, meaning they don't change the brain. Over time, they may alter the receptivity of receptors, but they don't create new connections. They don't break down old connections. You know what I mean? They don't do things like that actual thinking or actions or doing does. So they're just a temporary fix. But yet people are led to believe that they are the long-term answer. But long-term, you're going to have, they may alter the way your brain is responding, and you may need to take more and more and more of it, and then there's the side effect of it. And that's why it's important. I'm not against drugs per se if they help people, but I think people just need to understand that, it's not basically the way they think. The primary problem is not a chemical imbalance. That doesn't exist. And by taking drugs, you're not dealing with that primary issue. And that is not your only option at all. It can be a temporary fix, and that's great, but you need to look for a long-term option, which asks the questions, what symptoms do you have? Why do you have them? And what areas of your brain are actually responsible? And it's not a chemical imbalance. It's what we call a functional connectivity imbalance. It's the activity in the brain that's out of balance, and it's primarily the right and the right and left hemisphere that's out of balance.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, this is totally changing how I thought of things altogether. So that's really interesting. You've explained to me that like it's not chemicals that are in your head, but I guess I didn't realize. I don't know. It's just not how I thought things worked.
Yeah, the chemicals are just a messenger. They're not the message. You know what I mean? Like, just like in a computer, the electricity is not the message. It's a messenger of whatever data or information you're trying to transmit.
Okay, can you explain one more time? And maybe people know this already, but I have trouble deciphering them. Can you explain one more time the difference between serotonin and dopamine?
Well, dopamine, is more left hemisphere, and it promotes motor activity, so movement. So like if the left brain's overactive and the dopamine networks are overactive, we tend to get hyperactive. Like you have to move, you have to do things, or tics, or stimming behavior. Like when people can't move, like for instance, if they alter dopamine pathways in rats, they'll run around in circles for hours and hours and hours. And what we see is that we know that in general, we could look at autism as a hyperdopaminergic state where, parents will say, my kid never stops. They're constantly moving. They're constantly stimming. They don't stop moving. Dopamine is one of the left hemisphere neurotransmitters, or the pathways that they work are what lead to increased motor activity. It's also what we call executive function, but especially left brain executive functions like, language and memory and reading and doing math and, a lot of the academic things we think of. Dopamine is also part of a lot of motivational pathways. So the left brain we talked about is responsible for motivation, for getting you to do things, setting goals, believing you can get those goals. But too much dopamine on the left side and the pathways connected with it are also responsible for OCD and addictive behaviors. And that's why a lot of drugs, I believe Adderall, but Ritalin and, that really cause massive amounts of release of dopamine or really activate those pathways that use dopamine. Cocaine is something that causes this massive, effect on the dopamine pathways.
Sorry, I'm laughing because I told you about the dream that I had last night.
Yeah, you should tell that story.
No, I had like one of my mom's most like innocent church-going friends offering me massive amounts of cocaine in my dream last night, and I kept telling her to stop offering it to me, and I kept turning her down, and she would not stop. So I took some other drug that she gave me, and then I crashed my dad's car.
But you took the other
But this
drug
is a dream.
In the dream, but when you took the drug, you said, but I don't want to, feel anything. And she said, but that's the point of the drug. You won't feel anything.
Oh.
Which kind of stupid. Like, why would you take a drug not to feel anything?
I don't know, but she got me. I was like, yeah, I'll take it.
She was a pusher.
And she was a pusher.
She was a pusher. Yeah.
In real life, she's a very nice lady, but I have changed my mind about her ever since I've had that dream.
It's like, I saw this Instagram post, whatever, this guy, and he got on and he said, I want to do a formal apology. And his wife's sitting behind him, like he's in big trouble. And he's like, I want to tell the world that I just want to apologize to my wife because I cheated on her in a dream,
Yeah.
and I can't forgive myself. And she's like,
It's true. It takes a couple days for those things to go away. It feels really real.
and then he goes, and I went to the store, and I asked her before I left if she wanted anything, and she said no. And I went to the store, and then I came home and got something, and I didn't get her anything. And I should have known that she really did want something.
You should know these things right by now. You've been married for like 100 years.
It was so funny. Because started off, you thought he was really serious. Like this guy was like really, he did something bad, you know? And he said, and I cheated on her in a dream.
Sometimes those things just feel super real.
Yes. And, you know, a lot of those effects are caused by neurotransmitters in the brain.
Of course, full circle.
Yeah. So that's, I think, hopefully we're able to just let people understand this a little bit more. And like I said, I did create vitamins that provide like the precursors. So I have like a right brain vitamin and a left brain vitamin to help elevate or supply the amino acids that are needed to best make those neurotransmitters in the right brain and the left brain. And a lot of them are similar and overlap. But so that's why we created them, because there were no vitamins out there that, you know, they were like brain vitamins, but there weren't brain vitamins that would be for the right brain and then for the left brain.
Right. Okay, wait. So you were talking about dopamine, and then I said the difference between dopamine and serotonin.
Yeah. So serotonin is more of a right hemisphere neurotransmitter. And as I said, it's a little bit more of, you know, when you look at what the right hemisphere generates, it's a little bit more inhibition. It's a little bit more kind of stopping us from doing things. Also, emotions that are more what we call withdrawal. So the left brain is about approach behavior. So again, dopamine is more, you know, I'm going to approach something. That's why motor activity, moving, going towards something, you know, motivated. I want to go after something. I want to find something. I want to think about something. I'm going to have ideas, and I'm going to have memories, and I want to speak. I want to, you know, share information. The right brain is more cautious. It's more withdrawal. It's more, all right, I want to stop this, or I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to let the left brain do that. You know, I want to stop moving. I want to be able to relax and calm down, or I'm afraid of a situation. I think it's dangerous. The left brain and dopamine is like risk-taking behavior. So that's why when you're doing something like cocaine or speed or something, which, you know, cause significant activity in those dopamine pathways, you know, you'll do very risky behavior because, you know, you're activating that part of your brain that isn't worried about risk. It's more about, you know, going out there. And the left brain and dopamine pathways are what we call reward reinforced, meaning I do something, and if I do it well and I get a reward from it, whether that's, you know, someone saying, hey, you did a good job, or somebody saying, I like you, or I eat food, I'm looking for food, and then I find food and I eat food. Now I get a shot of dopamine, which goes, oh, that felt good. And it makes you feel a little euphoric. And that's what can become addictive. But it's meant to reinforce that behavior. It's like saying, okay, I'm going to give you a little shot of dopamine, and it's going to make you feel a little euphoria and happy for a while because I want you to do more of that.
Yeah.
I want you to find more of that food. I want you to find where that is so that we can live and survive and enjoy a good life. But if you get too much of that, then you become addicted to it. And then but then it's harder and harder. Like anybody that has done cocaine knows that the more you take cocaine, the less joy you get out of it, the less of that feeling that, you know, I'm going to be happy. After a while, you don't get it, and then you get depressed because your brain isn't going to be sensitive to it anymore.
So is it like, since you're saying that serotonin is like a natural thing in the right brain and dopamine is more of a natural thing in the left brain, that like subconsciously a lot of creatives that turn to drugs like Coke and Adderall and all these things, it's because they're searching for that dopamine that they don't have as much of?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I hadn't really thought, I wasn't really
Like
even
the rock
saying
star
that,
lifestyle comes from actual.
figured that out. But yeah, so it's their own way of actually trying to, because, you know, if the serotonin networks are high, the dopamine networks are going to be low. And dopamine is going to make you feel happy.
Yeah.
And so you're searching for, how do I, you know, become happy? And if you do something like, speed or cocaine or something like, maybe MDMA, whatever makes you happy, then in some way it's affecting those pathways. And so you're searching for more of that. So that may be another reason why, they get addicted to that.
So then do left brain people search for serotonin? Like what would give you serotonin?
Chocolate.
So like healthy
certain
things.
foods. I'm not sure what drugs might. I mean, again, a lot of antidepressants are really supposed to elevate serotonin.
So that's bad thing, so you're saying right brain people suffer most from depression, and taking an antidepressant is supposed to increase your dopamine, so they say, but really it's increasing
supposed to increase your serotonin,
which is you don't need more of.
Which you shouldn't need more of.
Right.
And if it does work, I mean, it would make sense that someone who's depressed should take dopamine drugs.
Yeah.
Like something like Ritalin or Adderall or.
Not should, we're just saying.
Right. Would make more sense.
Yeah.
You're going to elevate your dopamine. Whereas people that are more manic or anxious or angry should take more, like an antidepressant, which really should be more of an anti-anxiety. So again, should take something that's going to elevate serotonin and lower dopamine. So you're less manic, you're less hyperactive, you're less, like people that can't sleep, people that are, in any sort of manic phase, or maybe, really worried or about something.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So I think, we just want to give, because this is so common out there and ubiquitous, and this has been the terminology, and especially in my generation, everything was like, oh, it's a chemical imbalance.
Yeah. It's
so much more complex than that. And so understanding that, that you have to understand the limitations of medications and what they're actually doing. And they're still not really, some of it is not really well understood. But that, it may definitely make you feel better, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there are other long-term solutions that can physically and functionally change the brain on a long-term basis, which drugs do not.
Right. And also depending on, I would assume if your frontal lobe is developed yet, you should probably be even more careful with taking drugs, because like you said, every drug has its side effect, and especially in a growing brain, I guess. That's actually very important, because, some of the most powerful areas that respond the most to transmitters like dopamine and serotonin, like what's called a mesocortical pathway or mesolimbic pathways. I was going to say, you forgot to bring up the mesolimbic pathways.
And they are in the frontal lobe areas. And so if they're not mature, that's where you may see someone and they may go, well, they must have a dopamine deficiency. But no, it's just that area of the brain hasn't grown yet. It hasn't matured. It's not that they're deficient. And that's why giving them drugs isn't really going to make sense. It doesn't make that area mature more. If anything, it might actually stunt its growth.
Right.
We know that, the largest study ever done looking at the effects of Ritalin for ADHD was an 18-year study, basically almost 20-year study. And, what it showed was that in the first 14 months, people that were on Ritalin that had ADHD, as opposed to those who had ADHD that didn't do Ritalin, the ones that were on Ritalin seemed to be functioning better. So at that point, they thought, oh, okay, this is convincing. So Ritalin is the treatment of choice. But then by the time they got to 3 years, the difference between the two groups was gone. There wasn't any difference. And then as they went further down the road and they, followed them out for almost 20 years, they realized that there was no difference in outcomes long-term between those that were medicated and those that weren't medicated. That you would think that the people that were medicated, would pay more attention, do better in school, get better grades, functionally seem, have less problems, or that's what you would hope. That didn't turn out to be the case at all. There was no difference in the outcomes whatsoever. The only difference was that the group that were medicated on average were shorter.
Yeah, I have heard that it stunts your growth.
And maybe had a little bit of an elevated blood pressure. So, and why did it stunt the growth? Well, they believed that it had some effect on delaying the onset of puberty.
Oh.
So it may have actually kept them in a more immature state, which is what's causing ADHD to begin with.
Huh.
So understanding that that's not the long-term solution, but yet that's what most people think, and it's not. And so, and also, you know, when we talk about using medications like this, there's very, very, very few studies that look at what happens when you use more than one medication. And especially when it comes to mental health issues. Now you start looking at things and you see, okay, now you'll actually see an ad on TV that says, if you have tardive dyskinesia, which is when, you know, you see people have these facial movements and everything like that.
Sorry, I'm not laughing at the thing. I was laughing at you.
First of all, the only thing that causes tardive dyskinesia is antipsychotic medication.
Oh.
It's the only thing that causes it. So someone's psychotic, they give them antipsychotic medication, and they may develop these really, you know, like facial tics and things like that. And it's caused by the medication. And so now there's commercials would say, then you can take this other drug,
of course,
which may lower the tardive dyskinesia. But, you know, so there are a couple of studies now, or a few studies. I remember a few years ago, there were only 3 studies that were ever done of looked at what happened when you use more than one medication for depression. And 2 of the 3 studies, people got worse.
Wow.
But you get people that are on, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 medications. There's never been studies that look at that, ever, and have no idea what the effects are, what the long-term effects are, especially in children. And many of the drugs that are used in children, especially for mood-related things or even for attention, were never studied for those things. Like we talked about, like, you know, some beta blockers that are used for ADHD. It was never studied for ADHD. There's never been any studies looking at that. So that's when people say, well, these are evidence-based treatments. Not really, because they've never been studied for what they're being used as.
Right.
So yeah, they were studied and they're evidence-based for blood pressure, but not for ADHD, you know? Yeah. So that's the thing. People just have to listen and think and understand that, you know, just be more aware of what's happening and how it really works. And, you know, just all of the information that's out there, look at it a little bit more critically and understand it.
Yeah, pay attention, guys. Come on.
But don't take a drug to pay attention.
Yeah, I was about to say. Maybe if you took your drugs, you'd be paying more attention. No, I'm kidding. Don't do that. Okay, well, that was a very, very informative episode.
Thank you.
Thank you. And okay, if you guys have any questions, as per usual, just send them in to me. And until next time.
Okay. Love you, honey.
Love you too, Dad.
Bye.